Turn back to the hearings about the January 6th attack on the Capitol and what we learned and what's at stake. And Donald, you wrote an extensive piece in The Atlantic over the summer after the 7th January 6th committee hearing entitled "The DOJ Must Prosecute Trump." And you co-wrote this back then, quote, "Everyone knew before the hearings began that we were dealing with perhaps the gravest imaginable offense against the nation short of secession, a serious nationwide effort pursued at multiple levels to overturn the unambiguous outcome of a national election. We all knew as well that efforts were and are unfolding nationwide to change laws to undermine the electoral processes with the specific objective of succeeding at the same project in 2024 and after. But each hearing has sharpened our understanding that Donald Trump himself is the one who made it happen. Any argument that Donald Trump lacked provable criminal intent is contradicted by the facts elicited by the January 6th committee."
Mr. Ayer, I want to ask you, did yesterday's hearing further sharpen your conviction?
I absolutely think so. And I guess I would draw an analogy. I was recently in Madrid and I saw Hieronymus Bosch's painting, The Garden of Earthly Delights, which, if you're familiar with it, is an incredible portrayal of mankind misbehaving in every imaginable demonic and obscene way. and one of the things they do there, I spent 20 minutes staring at this painting, is they have a video screen that blows up little pieces of this picture and it shows the details. And the details you see are things you wouldn't notice if you were 10 feet away, which we were. And that's what happened yesterday. What happened yesterday was an incredible focus on a variety of things. First, the details that show Donald Trump had a clear plan that he worked out with other people to lie when he lost the election. His own words show, it isn't just that Bill Barr told him that he'd lost, but his own words show he knew he'd lost. So the accountability there is clearer yet than it was before.
And Steve Bannon saying before the election, hey, this is what Trump's going to do if he loses. We're just going to lie about it, say we won, and he's going to do some crazy things.
Absolutely. We all knew that there was, there were, from the earlier hearings, we knew there were guns in the audience and things were going on. Well, now we know from these communications, thousands of them, I guess, that what did we know? Well, we knew a ton. Right. And somehow or other, law enforcement, Secret Service, maybe even FBI, I'm not sure, got compromised. Right. In a way that the message didn't quite get through. So that level of detail is put in place. Right. I mean, there's a lot more that's specific that shows Donald Trump's specific culpability. I was utterly, you can see from the article, totally convinced before that Donald Trump was the single driving force behind all of this. He's the key actor in every step of these 5 or 6 different things. Right. But now we've got local color and detail and specifics and his own statements to Cassidy Hutchinson and others saying he knew he'd lost. Right.
And of course, you say this as a Republican who served for Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. Your piece is so important because one of the things that's haunted me is the precedent that will be set if a former president is prosecuted. Yeah. Because I don't want parties in the future misusing that to go after another president. But in this case, it is a balancing act. And I love what you wrote here. It's clarifying. The tradition of not prosecuting a former president must yield to the manifest need to protect our constitutional form of government and to ensure that the violent effort to overthrow is never repeated. Both precedents are bad. Prosecuting a former president. Right. Yeah. But sadly here, it seems that the precedent that would be set by not prosecuting a president who tried to overthrow American democracy leaves, I believe, Merrick Garland with no choice.
I'm totally with you. I don't see how you can have someone who, the evidence is clear beyond any, in my mind, conceivable doubt that Donald Trump actively pursued a course, planned ahead, a whole series of these steps which they went through in the hearing to overturn our democratic system. That happened.
Yeah.
And if the system isn't up to responding to that, if the system isn't able to say, well, yes, we have this evidence, we know this happened, we know the President of the United States did this, but we're going to take a pass.
Right.
We can't take a pass. That's about as bad a thing. I would say it is the worst thing that anyone can do to our system of government.
The president would be absolutely horrific. And your colleague, Ashley Parker, was here before talking about her article, or she wrote an article saying, we'd like to think of Trump as sort of this madman, this king with no control over his emotions, when in fact, what we've seen now from the January 6th committee is this has all been planned. This has all been laid out, starting with when his lawyers told him, no, Mr. President, you've lost. You can't do anything to challenge this. He goes out, he tweets, come January 6th, it's going to be crazy. And from that point on, he and Steve Bannon and Roger Stone lay it all out. And Bannon yesterday, I must say, again, just an out-and-out confession. If Trump loses, he said before the election, election night, he's going to do some crazy, crazy things. He's not going. He's not going to concede. They said that before he lost.
We should believe these people when they tell us what they're going to do, and it's what he did. And time again, Trump was told, this allegation is false. There's nothing there. There's nothing here. There's nothing there. And he would go out and nonetheless deliberately, knowing it to be untrue, talk about Dominion voting systems and switching votes and this and that. Minutes after he'd been told that this is complete and utter nonsense. When I was bureau chief in South America, I covered democracies that were struggling to get their footing. And the essential problem they had was trying to reestablish the rule of law, which we take for granted here. But that's a necessary element of a healthy and functioning democracy. And I really think that's where we are in terms of what decision Merrick Garland makes. Ultimately, you have to have the rule of law. You don't have a democracy without it.
So, Adrian, and Merrick Garland is now faced with an impossible choice, this incredible dilemma, and the facts may very well compel him to make this charge. Put on your political hat. Let's look at the lens as to how this would play out were this to happen. We'll assume it would be after the midterms if it happens at all. That seems to be the DOJ guideline. What does that do to Republicans, to Trump supporters, to Democrats if a former president is indicted?
Yeah, so I think what the fascinating thing about the way that these committee hearings have been run is that we're not necessarily looking at a scenario where I think a lot of voters' minds are changed. But I think what we're doing is, of course, laying out the case for a criminal prosecution. So if that happens after the midterms, how does that affect Donald Trump, whether or not he decides to run for president? And I think what it does is it may solidify even more his base, his MAGA base. But when it comes to the independent and moderate voters, which are the ones who will ultimately decide who wins in 2024, I don't think it's exactly a turn on to them that someone who was the sitting president, instigated what happened on January 6th. The evidence is so clearly laid out. I think that's where the rub is. Again, 34% of the electorate, whatever the number is, somewhere in the low 30s, is always going to be with Donald Trump or is always going to be with the MAGA wing of the party. But that is not enough to get elected president of the United States. So again, I look at this through the lens of where do independent voters go? Where do the moderate swing suburban voters go? I don't think this is something that they'll find attractive in a presidential candidate.
What about Trump apologists who are Republican leaders? Do they finally break away?
Well, they break away when enough of their base breaks away. But
maybe they don't.
But Adrian, you are right. It's the MAGA base, but the MAGA base is being boiled down right now, and it's being boiled down in part mainly because of what Donald Trump has been doing. He's now embracing QAnon conspiracy theories. He continues to become more and more extreme as he feels saying things are becoming more tenuous. And I'm just wondering what you think. I've seen several people on the, I will say, hard right, the ideological hard right, breaking from Trump. And it seems their message is very clear to their followers, to their viewers. And I forget exactly who said this, but it really, I think, clarifies it for Republicans who want to win elections. Every day, people are talking about Donald Trump. Republicans are losing. Every day, people are talking about Joe Biden. Republicans are winning.
Yep.
And that's their message. And it seems to be a pretty good focus for Republican candidates right now. Talking about Donald Trump. So if he gets, the Mar-a-Lago raid, all the Republicans get crazy. Oh, this is going to help the Republicans. No, it helped the Democrats because everybody's talking about Donald Trump.
Yeah.
If Donald Trump gets indicted, well, yes, we sit here and worry, well, how is this going to impact democracy? Republicans who think this is going to be a win, I think
Republicans
they're
who are
wrong.
in really tight marginal races right now do not want Donald Trump leading the headlines. That is just the bottom line. And every day that, we see that we're talking about the January 6 hearings, every day that there's another hearing to talk about is another day that Donald Trump is in the headlines. So it's not something that's appealing. And again, going back to the MAGA base, this is what I think we all have to remember is that they are not enough to get a president elected. They just simply aren't. So if he does decide to run in 2024 and he's not doing anything to try to attract, independent moderates, any voter is not part of the MAGA wing, he's not going to get reelected or he's not going to get elected.